Good evening. Oh, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for coming and for spending your Friday night with us. When Vanessa introduced me, she said that I work for one of the country's leading independent writing centers, and of course, there would be no Grub Street if there was not the Loft. And I never miss an opportunity whenever I'm around people like you to say how much the Loft has made places like Grub Street and other literary organizations around the country possible. This is one of the most generous organizations that I've ever encountered, always willing to support authors, to support other organizations like us, and I just wanted to say thank you to the Loft for all that you've done, not only for Grub Street, but for writers everywhere, in particular, these wonderful mentees that I've had the opportunity to work with today. Well, last night we had dinner. Today we had class. Tomorrow we'll have class. And it's been a real privilege to work with you guys and to be a part of the Law for the first time. This is my first visit to Minneapolis and my first visit to the actual Loft that I've been working with and been inspired by for all these years. So again, thank you to everyone for that. So I'm going to read from my most recent novel, which is All This Talk of Love, which is told from the perspective of 4 members of an Italian-American family, the Grassos. There are 2 immigrant parents, Antonio and, this voice keeps changing, Antonio and Maddalena, who are in their late 70s, and 2 first-generation adult children, Prima and Frankie. And I should apologize for having to do all this setup. It's when you read from a novel, it's always a little bit tricky if you don't read from the beginning, so I have to do this little bit of setup. So there's Antonio and Maddalena, they're in their 70s, they're 2 children, Prima and Frankie. At the beginning of the novel, Prima announces that she's bought the entire family a non-refundable trip back to their ancestral village of Santa Cecilia, which they've never visited since Antonio and Maddalena came to the U.S. after World War II. This gift, like most gifts, causes all sorts of problems, though, because most family gifts, I should say, because Maddalena refuses to go for various reasons, whereas Antonio, the father, is desperate to go, and the kids are caught in the middle. And the parents, of course, play them off of each other. Antonio and Maddalena had another son, Tony, who at 15 committed suicide by jumping off the Delaware Memorial Bridge. They had another son, Frankie, very soon after Tony's death as a kind of replacement son. There is a family restaurant called the Aldila, which Antonio began 40 years ago with his brother Mario, who is now deceased. And again, I'm reading from the middle of the novel, and throughout the novel, Maddalena has been showing worrisome signs of forgetfulness and confusion. But Antonio, her husband, is not telling anyone about that either. And the last thing you need to know, because you have all that, right? Like, you've got it. You can totally just, take a 10-question quiz on that information. Antonio and Maddalena also take ballroom dancing lessons. So that's the other thing you need to know. Okay, so now I'm going to actually read from the book. You'll find this out later. I won't mess that up. The house is finally quiet. Antonio in his chair, in this room of unwrapped boxes and empty tossed-aside envelopes, watches the rerun of Midnight Mass at the Vatican on TV. The sound's on mute because the picture is all that matters. Get the camera off the Pope, he thinks. Show the people and the piazza, and if you can, swing the lens over the mountains 40 miles to Santa Cecilia buried in snow. Show me my old house, the chestnut trees, the frozen spring. But the picture doesn't change. The Pope mumbles on. From the window, he can see St. Mary's, the church that holds his family, most of his family, not Tony, not Mario. Someone is always missing. The parking lot is packed with the cars of hypocrites. He's not one of them. When he needs God, he turns over in his bed and puts his arm around his wife and says, "Tesoro, tesoro." He doesn't need a new red sweater or a polo wallet or a gift certificate for a haircut at some overpriced salon. He hates for his kids and his wife to spend money on stupidaggini. Every dollar they waste on him is an insult. You want to show me you love me, then take me to Santa Cecilia where I belong. I can count on one hand the years we have left together. He is there now in his village, a boy again, in his heavy coat, the grown-ups around him with candles in their cupped hands, the church cold as a crypt. There is the ceramic baby Jesus at the altar to kiss and adore. Or maybe it's plastic. Did they have plastic back then? When did plastic start? The years are a jumble. Antonio was a boy of 7 and Madalena a baby. The day her parents announced her, they sat her on the counter of the grocery, and customers came to welcome her to the world. Antonio looked up at her wiggling toes, at her chiacchierona sisters pinching her cheeks. The Piccinellis lived down the street from his family. They owned that big store, and the Grassos owned a pezzetto of land, a 3-room house, and a few chickens. The baby Madalena was pure white. No dirt under her fingernails, no marks on her skin. She glowed in the sunlight of the grocery window. He may have invented all of this, the light, the baby on the counter, but it's as real as the fire beside him on this Christmas Eve, 72 years later. He reaches up to tickle Madalena's toes. His father is not there to slap his hand away. His father has been gone 40 years. How strange it is to be at the end of life so soon. 72 years from one midnight to another, from the boy at the counter looking up to the old man in the chair looking back. So what if he feels sorry for himself? He's not allowed. He's never been a brave person. He is not one of those immigrants to write a book about, the ones who came to America with empty pockets. He had a mother and father to lead him by the hand on and off the ship, find him his first job, give him a house with a finished basement and a yard with a great arbor. He had friends, cars, girls, a brother to put up half the money for a restaurant, a faithful wife. An ordinary life split between two worlds. Soon, when he's gone, a few of those people over at St. Mary's will cry, but only for a little while. Their lives are full enough without him. The customers will still come to the Aldila for their calamari and their stuffed shells. They'll sit waiting for their tables under the framed black and white photo of Antonio and Mario with their arms around each other, and if they notice the photo at all, they'll say, maybe, "Aw." Strange to be a sad old man in an easy chair, the years settling on him, and yet not strange at all. He and his bocce friends at the lodge talk of nothing but the years. Moments ago, they say I was a man of 25, leaning over the railing of a ship, watching Italy sink into the ocean. Their kids, like Antonio's kids, like all kids, appeared one day like magic, then disappeared. Why did nobody warn them of the grief of fatherhood? Not that your kids grow up and leave you in every possible way, but that they're strangers from the start. They don't stand still long enough. They let you get only so close. And you work too many hours, and they tell their friends their secrets, and they love you, but with their souls only, the way they love their country or God. Their hearts belong to other people. When he can shut the rest out, this is how he remembers Tony, a boy who loved his father and the place his father built. From the age he could walk and talk, the only thing Tony liked more than walking and talking at Antonio's side was walking and talking at Antonio's side at the Aldila. No one has loved the restaurant so strong since him. After school, when his homework done, Tony would come straight to the restaurant to help. He'd fold napkins, arrange the forks and knives on the tablecloths, cut the slices of cheesecake, and store them in the refrigerator. He drew new logos and signs for the restaurant on the backs of the placemats and showed them to his father, joking that when he grew up and the restaurant became his, he'd make it more modern. By the time he was 14 in 1970, he was doing the work of a busboy, making good tips, because who couldn't fall in love with him? He was already tall, already handsome, the shadow of his first beard growing, his legs strong, his face lit up always for the old ladies. There was a waiter that summer, Dante, the son of Marconi the electrician. Antonio hired him as a favor, though he had no experience. Dante was nothing special. Worse, he had a tattoo on his left leg and big horse teeth and a ponytail. He was on his way to becoming a derelict, another of those children who wasted their parents' sacrifices. But he had charm, and Tony followed him around like a puppy dog. It was after Dante came, in June of '70, that he changed. Dante brought him albums and taught him to do mean but perfect imitations of the managers, Gilberto and Lucio. Lucio had a high girly voice, Gilberto a stutter. He pushed Tony to play pranks on the dishwashers and cooks to cover his tables when he snuck off for a cigarette with his long-haired friends who hung around outside the restaurant near the bus stop. Antonio put up with this for the free electric work and because of his son. When the two had different schedules, Tony sulked and yawned and sat in the corner writing in a book of guest checks he carried around in his apron. One day, Antonio overheard Lucio asking one of the other busboys, "So what's that prince always scribbling?" He was a gossip, worse than an old lady, Lucio. Still is. "Who knows," said the busboy. "He's a smart kid. He's probably doing his homework." "In the summer? In the checkbook?" said Lucio. "It's not normal, all that writing. It's too many words." Antonio ignored this at first. Then he watched his son more closely. Tony took that book of checks everywhere. Whenever he got a free second, he'd write in it with concentration. At the end of every day, he tore out a handful of pages, stuffed them in his pocket, and threw the rest of the book in the trash. One day, the widow, Ida, called to say she needed help in her kitchen. Could Antonio send over somebody tall and strong? He sent Tony, who left his apron behind on a hook in the kitchen and in its front pocket the book of checks. Ida did not live far. Antonio had only a few minutes. From the window of the Aldila, he'd watch Tony cross Union, jog over to 8th Street, and turn the corner toward Hitzias. He had long legs and thick, dark curls and a smart head on his shoulders. He was so young, just 14, innocent and decent, with a long life ahead, full of every possible good thing. This is another way Antonio chooses to remember him, his son who turned the corner that day and came back somebody else. He flipped through the lime green pages to the back. Tony's handwriting, small and scratched, filled the lines. He'd crammed his words into every inch, like he was a prisoner, and these the last scraps of paper on earth. They were letters, some to himself, some to Dante Marconi. Dante's name was on every page. But as letters, they made no sense. No boy in his right mind sent letters like this. Antonio didn't understand. The black and blue ink marks blurred into a loud mess of nonsense. Scarabocchi, his teacher back in Santa Cecilia, used to call sloppy handwriting. Scarabocchi, she taught him, was a sign of disrespect. When Tony and Prima did their homework, Antonio sometimes stood guard over them as they wrote, watching like a hawk for Scarabocchi. He couldn't help them get the right answers, but he could insist that their handwriting showed respect. Straight rows of neat letters, clear numbers. Not this disgraceful mess of Tony's. You don't write so sloppy and small, Antonio knew, unless you are ashamed. I'm going to skip a little bit, but he ends up firing Dante, and he takes the pages to his friend Giulio's house, who explains to him that what's written in the guest checks are essentially love letters to Dante Marconi from his son. And then it picks up. There are always signs, they tell you. The newspaper and TV shows, all they talk about is signs. You're supposed to look for them and then know what they mean when you find them, but Antonio's never trusted himself to read signs right. He is a man, a father, blinded easily by love, by the faith that if you want something badly enough for yourself or for your children, and you work hard to get it, it will come to you. After that day in Giulio's kitchen, he was as blinded as ever by love for Tony, more blind, if you can be such a thing, and wanted more fiercely than he'd wanted anything in his life for Giulio to be wrong, for his son to turn out normal, healthy, untouched. So he watched him. He stole more checks, read more pages of the same scarabocchi about Dante, always and only Dante, long after Antonio chased him from the Aldila. He went through every scrap of paper in Tony's room, looked in the back of his dresser drawers, under his bed, in the corners of his closets. He smelled his clothes, checked behind the mirrors. He listened in on his phone calls. He followed him home from school, kept 2 blocks behind him in his car. He waited in the parking lot while Tony sat with his friends, normal-looking girls and boys, in a booth at the charcoal pit, looking happy enough, right up to the day. When he went missing, they searched his room, pulled out his desk drawer, turned it upside down. Index cards, notebooks, and a stack of rubber-banded guest checks fell to the floor. Quickly, Antonio slipped the checks into his pockets. He kept them with him, reading over and over for a clue to where his son might have run off. 2 days later, they dragged his body from the river. Tony left his family with ugly words. Antonio burned them in a garbage can in the backyard. At the funeral, he avoided Giulio's eyes. When he visited Giulio's eyes. When he visited at holidays, Antonio walked past him, never speaking another word to him about anything. Soon, Giulio was dead too, and there wasn't a person left who knew Tony's heart the way his father did. Lately, that miserable time keeps coming back to him. The words on the guest checks won't stay down. They shouted him from the dirt behind the garbage cans. The flower on Dante's legs, the body falling from the bridge, Tony asking him with his heartbroken face, when he got back from helping his Sia Ida, why he'd sent his best friend away. And then there are times, like now, when Antonio feels, can he even admit it, relieved, almost grateful that Tony died when he did. As he's learned more of the ways of the world, seen it change and rot before his eyes, he's come to convince himself that his son would never have survived. 40-year-old men dying from pneumonia, teachers at the dance studio prancing around in their tight pants unashamed, protests in San Francisco, parades in New York, celebrating. Would that have been Tony's life, a Grasso's life? He'd have been 43 this year. What does 43 look like for that kind of man? Would he be wasting away to a talking skeleton like Rock Hudson, who'd once been handsome and rich and on top of the world? As impossible as it's been for Antonio to imagine Tony's adult life, as much as it turns his stomach and fills him with fear, it's worse to feel this relief, this sickening gratitude. This long darkness has been his life since then. If only he could go back to the day Ida called and asked him to send over somebody strong. Instead, he settles for Santa Cecilia, where the darkness never touched. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, and cars are leaving the church parking lot. He turns on the spotlight and walks to the end of the driveway without his coat. Before long, his family rounds the corner. They say their goodbyes and see you tomorrows, and Prima and Tom and the boys get into their cars. Too many cars for one family, a waste of gas and extravagance. Before Frankie can disappear into his room, Antonio asks him, "So how was church?" "How do you think?" Frankie says, smiling. "Smoke, mirrors, hypocrites." They share this, at least. Neither of them trust the Catholic Church to do anything but take their money. The dining room table is cleared, the dishes are clean, and the hallway swept. Only the den remains a mess. The presents, the wrapping paper crumbled into balls, the pine needles. Antonio and Maddalena will take care of this tomorrow together before they drive with Frankie out to Prima's. Now it's time to rest. Maddalena closes all the lights. She lies on the couch in front of the tree, using her old flowered house dress for a blanket. Antonio goes back to his chair, then changes his mind and sits beside her. Her feet and ankles in his lap. They don't talk. They're both so tired. "Another year," she says. The TV stays on mute. The tree glows. They fall asleep this way, eventually, and when they wake, it's morning, and the tree lights are still on, and Tony is still gone, and they're still older than they've ever been, and it's like any other day. Except when Antonio says, "I'll make the coffee," Madalena says, "But who are you?" Thanks.